can share with you that how you can secure your risk in your personal life. That we Indian people are always interested to do savings. For what purpose? For future occurrences or future emergencies. Only money can help us. No one can help us. Okay. Few people, those are very smart, take insurance. Okay. And few people only save money. There are two types. You can invest and save with the help of insurance, and only saving is a different part to save money in bank. Okay. Whereas in insurance, you are saving plus risk covered, means investment is risk is there. So when you take a insurance, life insurance or general insurance of you, that it will be helpful for your future incidents in your family member. You have now to spend money from your pocket at that time, or you need not to borrow money from your friends, relatives, and others. Okay. So always try to save money. Okay. This risk management uh, process and this subject is totally related with insurance. Okay. To mitigate the risk levels. Regardless of the type of risk being considered, the risk management process involves several key steps. For example, identify all significant risk, evaluate the potential frequency and severity of losses, develop and select methods for managing risk. In identification, identifying potential internal and external risks that may affect business operations. Risks may be financial, operational, strategic, legal, or environmental. Tools: brainstorming, SWOT analysis, checklist, historical data. SWOT analysis means strengths, weakness, opportunities, or threats. Few times, instead of SWOT, new technology is there that some people use the SWOT as SWOC, SWOC, means that C is choices instead of threats. Okay, so keep in your mind strengthen, weakness, opportunity, and choices or threats. If possible, this include an estimation of the maximum loss that can reasonably be expected to occur in a given period with a relatively high level of confidence. This value is known in pure risk management as the maximum probable loss, and in financial risk management as value at risk, VAR. Implementing the risk management method chosen, monitoring the performance and sustainability of the risk management methods and strategies on going basis. The same general framework applies to business and individual risk management. You will learn more about major exposure to losses from pure risk, risk evaluation, and the selection and implementation of risk management methods in subsequent chapter. To discuss risk management objective for businesses and individuals. It is useful in this introductory session to further acquaint you with basic aspects of risk management by summarizing the major methods used to manage risk. Risk management method summarizes the major methods of managing risk. These methods which are not mutually exclusive, can be broadly classified as l- first, loss control, second is loss financing, and third is internal risk reduction. Loss control and internal risk reduction commonly involve decisions to invest or forgo investing resources to reduce expected losses. They are conceptually equivalent to other investment decisions, such as firm's decisions to buy a new plant or an individual decision to buy a computer. Okay, both decisions are depends upon us what to take, a plant or property or computer. Loss financing decisions refer to decisions about how to pay for losses if they do occur. Actions that reduce the expected cost of losses by reducing the frequency of losses and or the severity, size or losses that occur are known as loss control. Loss control also is sometimes known as risk control. Actions that primarily affect the frequency of losses are commonly called loss prevention method. Actions that primarily influence the severity of losses that do occur are often called loss reduction method. How to control loss controls? Reduce the level of risky activity or increase the precautions. Loss in financing, retention and self-insurance, insurance, hedging, other contractual risk transfers, internal risk reductions, diversification and investment in information. You will find that few topics are coming again and again because risk management process is defined in only these points. Use of the term loss control as opposed to risk control helps avoid confusion between activities that reduce the expected loss of losses and activities that reduce risk variability, such as internal risk reduction. Terminology aside, the most important thing for you to understand is how these activities work and can be used to increase business value. Would be routine inspections of problems. This inspection helps reduce the frequency of risk. Viewed from another perspective, there are two general approaches to loss control: reducing the level of risky activity, and second, increasing precautions against loss for activities that are undertaken. First, exposure to loss can be reduced by reducing the level of risky activities. For example, by cutting back production of risky products or shifting attention to less risky products lines. Limiting the level of risky activity primarily affect the frequency of losses. The main cost of this strategy is that it forgoes any benefits of the risky activities that would have been achieved apart from the risk involved. In the limit, exposure to losses can be completely eliminated by reducing the level of activity to zero. That is, by not engaging in the activity at all. The strategy is called risk avoidance. As a specific example of limiting the level of risky activity, consider a trucking firm that hauls toxic chemical that might harm people or the environment in the case of an accident and thereby produce claims for damages. In chemical company, chemical are always fire supporter, means highly inflammable. The firm could reduce the frequency of liability claims by cutting back on the number of shipments that in hauls. Alternatively, it could avoid the risk completely by not hauling toxic chemicals and instead hauling non-toxic substances such as clothing or apart from cholesterol, cheese. We know that the food we consume, preserved foods, means jams, jellies, pickles, cheese, okay, and other things. These are processed foods and it may have chemicals. Why chemical used? To preserve its shell life, to preserve it for long time. Okay, means it's our own decision to consume these types of food or not, because it will definitely hamper our health. An example from personal risk management would be a person who flies less frequency to reduce the probability of dying in a plane crash. This risk could be completely avoided by never flying. Of course, alternatively transportations methods might be much riskier. Means decision is in your hands that whether you have to travel any journey by bus, by train, or by air or airplane. Okay, means there is a higher chances to crash the plane. Okay, so you can avoid those chances with the help of avoiding traveling methods by the aeroplane. Instead of, you can choose train or bus. But another thing is that why we travel from air, because to save our time. For example, driving down Interstate 95 from New York to Miami the day before Thanksgiving, along with many long haul trucks, including those transporting toxic chemicals. You know that there there are any events or concerns, live concerns in big cities, just like in Pune, just arranged a global race on this Monday. So on 19th January to 23 January. So there was a traffic chaos. So people are using uh, air traveling in these situations to avoid traffics. The second major approach to loss control is to increase the amount of precautions level of care for a given level of risky activities. The goal here is to make the activity safer and thus reduce the frequency and or severity of losses. Through testing the safety and installation of safety equipment are example of increased precautions. The trucking firm in the example above could give its driver extensive training in safety, because we know always truck drivers takes wines or they are drinking wines at the time of driving, and it may be risky for the occurrences of accidents. Okay, so every owner of that truck owners always try to keep the drivers who is not drinking. Increased precautions usually involve direct expenditure or other costs. For example, the increased time and attentions required to drive an automobile more safely. Concept checks explain how the two major approaches to loss control, reducing risky activity and increasing precautions could be used to reduce the risk of injury to construction firm employee. How could these two approaches be used to reduce the risk of contracting a sexually transmitted diseases? Loss financing method used to obtain funds to pay for or offset losses that occur are known as loss financing, sometimes called risk financing. There are four broad methods of financing losses. First, retention, second, insurance, three, hedging, and four, other contractual risk transfers. These approaches are not mutually exclusive. That is, they often are used in combination. Means you cannot use a single technique. You must have to use all that methods in combine. With retention, a business or individual retains the obligation to pay for part or all of the losses. For example, a trucking company might decide to retain the risk that cash flows will drop due to oil price increases. When coupled with a formal plan to fund losses for medium to large businesses, retentions often is called self-insurance. The rate of diesels and petrols means fuels are not in the hand of any owner. It is totally depends upon the policy and the policy of government and the international market rates and the treaties. Firms can pay retained losses using either internal or external funds. Internal funds include cash flows from ongoing activities and investment in liquid assets that are dedicated to financing losses. External sources of funds include borrowing and issuing new stocks, but these approaches may be very costly. Following large losses, note that these approaches still involve retention even though they employ external sources of funds. For example, the firm must pay back any funds borrowed to finance losses. When new stock is issued, the firm must share future profits with new stockholders. The second major method of financing losses is the purchase of insurance contract. As you most likely already know, the typical insurance contract requires the insurer to provide funds to pay for specified losses, thus financing these losses in exchange for receiving a premium from the purchaser at the inception of the contract. Insurance contract reduce risk for the buyer by transferring some of the risk of loss to the insurance. Most of the times, what's happen, insurance company always takes analysis from their surveyors about these types of losses by fire in that company and analyze that how many amount should be paid of these losses. If company is declared that we have loss of 50 lakhs, but the company analysis analyst will check the losses, actual losses, and will pass near about 40 to 45 lakhs only. Insurers in turn reduce risk through diversification. For example, they sell large numbers of contracts for provide coverage for a variety of different losses. The third broad method of loss financing is hedging. Just a minute. The third broad method of loss financing is hedging. As noted above, financial derivatives such as forwards, futures, options, and swaps are used extensively to manage various types of risk, most notably price risk. These contracts can be used to hedge risk, that is, key may be used to offset losses that can occur from changes in interest rates, commodity prices, foreign exchanges rates, and the like. Some derivatives have begun to be used in the management of pure risk, and it is possible that their use in pure risk management will expand in the future. Individual and small businesses do relatively little hedging with derivatives. We discussed derivatives, their use in hedging risk, and how they compare to insurance in this method. At this point, it is useful to illustrate hedging with a very simple example. Firms that use oil in the production process are subject to loss from unexpected increases in oil prices. Oil producers are subject to loss from unexpected decreases in oil prices. What's happened? These transport companies takes or finalized the rate of transporting goods, that may be finished goods or raw material. But if price or rate of that journey is already decided, and the rate of diesel or petrol is increased, it will be hamper the profit of that transport owner. So all these consideration must be in our minds, okay, before to start any transactions. We must have to forecast what will be happen, what will be change, what will be the government policy. So I can also suggest you that you should have to read newspaper on daily basis at the time of taking your breakfast or taking your tea or coffee. You must have to read minimum one or two papers, newspapers, okay, to get the summary of all the occurrences happened in our city, district, state, country, and abroad. Both types of firms can hedge their risk by entering into a forward contract that requires the oil producer to provide the oil user with a specified amount of oil on a specified future delivery date at a predetermined price known as the forward price, regardless of the market price of oil on that date, because the forward price is agreed upon when the contract is written. The oil user and the oil producer both reduce their price risk. The fourth major method of loss financing is to use one or more of a variety of other contractual risk transfers that allow businesses to transfer risk to another party, like insurance contracts and derivatives. The use of this contract also is pervasive in risk management. For example, businesses that engage independent contractors to perform some tasks routinely enter into contracts commonly known as hold harmless and indemnity agreements that require the contractors to protect the business from losing money from lawsuits that might arise if persons are injured by the contractor. Internal risk reductions. In addition to loss financing method that allows businesses and individual to reduce risk by transferring it to another entity. Businesses can reduce risk internally. There are two major forms of internal risk reductions. One is diversification and another is investment in information. Investment in information is mean I have given you the example of reading newspaper or buying data from reliable sources. Regarding the first of these firms can reduce risk internally by diversifying their activities, that is not pulling all of their egg in the basket. Newspaper owners always buy news from the reliable another agencies that take amount to give you the global news with videos, proofs, and photographs, because we have 100% trust on print media. We cannot trust on social media because every day there are always published fake news. So we can confirm the news is fake or origin. So we should have to read newspaper. You will learn the basics of how diversification reduce risk. Individual also routinely diversify risk by investing their saving in many different stocks. The ability of stockholder and shareholders to reduce risk through portfolio diversification is an important factor affecting insurance and hedging decision of firm. The second major method of reducing risk internally is to invest in information to obtain superior forecast of expected losses. Investing in information can produce more accurate estimates or forecast of future cash flows, thus reducing variability of cash flows around the predicted value. Example are abound, including estimates of the frequency and severity of losses from pure risk, marketing research on the potential demand for different products to reduce output price risk, and forecasting future commodity prices or interest rates. One way that insurance companies reduce risk is by specializing in the analysis of data to obtain accurate forecast of losses. Medium to large business often find in advantageous to reduce pure risk in this manner as well, given the large demand for accurate forecast of key variables that affects business value. and determine the price of contracts that can be used to reduce risk, such as insurance and derivatives. Many firms specialize in providing information and forecast to other firms and parties. Risk analysis, evaluating the likelihood and impact of identifying risk, help understand the severity of risk can be quantified or qualified. Today will analyze tools used in corporate risk management. Our objective is that show how to use historical loss data to calculate the characteristics of a probability distribution of the future losses, illustrate how to use regression analysis in risk management problem, and how to interpret regression results, show how to calculate and use correlation coefficient, illustrate how to use Monte Carlo simulations to access the desirability of alternative risk management policies, show how to calculate incremental cash flows and their present values. For that, you must have to know about how to draw mean, mode, median. Okay, you should know the simple formula of mean, mode, median. Risk management tools. You learned about probability distributions and the characteristic of probability distributions, expected value, standard deviations, and correlation. In these sessions, we extend this analysis of this session by presenting some tools used by corporate risk managers to analyze their risk and improve decision making. We note at the outset that the tools discussed in this chapter are primarily used by large firms. Generally, it is not worthwhile for small business and individual to spend resources conducting the analysis described in this session. The information generated from the analysis would have little impact on determining how much risk they can reasonably retain. For small businesses and individual risk management decisions depends largely on judgment, and commonly they are influenced by the advice of insurance agents and brokers. For large firms, the value of information provided by statistical analysis is much more likely to exceed the cost of undertaking the analysis. The cost of data collection, analysis, and interpretation, the information provided is likely to be more meaningful for reliable, and large firms can spread the fixed cost of analysis over a large number of exposures. Just a moment. That external sound disturb us. Calculating frequency and severity of losses from historical data. It presents data on medical payments resulting from workplace accidents at two restaurants owned by Clary corporations. The restaurants are of similar size and design. employ the same number of people, conduct similar amount of business revenue, and are located in areas with similar healthcare costs. A table is given for that, provides the date of the incidents and the amount of the loss for the year 2002. In this particular case, the loss payments are matched to the date of accidents, not when the payments were actually made. Sandeep, the risk manager for Clary Corporations, would like to examine the frequency of severity of losses during the year at the two restaurants using the data in the top panel. Total loss payments for the year, the frequency number of losses per year, and the average severity. The total loss payments divided by the frequency are calculated and reported in the bottom panel. The data indicates that restaurant B had greater frequency and severity of losses in 2002 than restaurant A, because 1 year of data is insufficient to conclude that restaurants B has a worse safety records. Sandeep collects loss data for the two restaurants for the past 8 years. Before comparing this data, he adjusts the historical data to take into account health care cost inflation. More specifically, he multiple each loss payments by 1 plus the rate of inflation from the year of the loss to 2002. For example, if healthcare costs increased by 4% from 2000 to 2001 and by 5% from 2000 to 2002, then Sandeep multiplies the 2000 losses by 1.05 to put them in 2002 dollars. He multiplies the 2000 losses by 1.04 into 1.05 equal to 1.092 to put them in 2002 dollars. The result of Sandeep's analysis are reported. On average, restaurant A has about 20 losses per year compared to about 22 for restaurant B. This is a relatively large difference. In contrast to the 2002 results, the average severity of accidents at restaurant B are slightly lower than those of A. The difference in average severity, however, is not very large. Thus, Sandeep concludes that restaurant B appears to have an accident frequency problem relative to A. After examining the frequency number in more detail, Sandeep suspects that restaurant B's frequency of loss has shown an increasing trend over time. To visually inspect the data, he plots the loss frequency in each year for both restaurants. It strongly suggests an increasing trend in loss frequency for restaurant B. Sandeep could use this information to justify expending some resources on trying to identify the reasons for the increasing frequency and thereby identify some potential ways of reducing loss frequency. Now, suppose that Sandeep would like to forecast expected losses for the year 2003 at each restaurant. If Sandeep makes the reasonable assumption that the probability distributions for loss frequency and loss severity have been and will continue to be stable over time for restaurant A, then he can use the historical average to calculate expected frequency and expected severity for 2003. Few companies are smartly doing or adopting the methods that when you got a profit at the end of the year, you must have few provisions in financial institutions and banks. Provisions are done from the profit at the end of the year. So the risk can be mitigated. Okay. Risk evaluation. Comparing risk level against acceptable risk standards. Prioritizing risk based on their importance helps management decide which risks need immediate attention. Once risks have been identified, an assessment of possible impact and corresponding likelihood of occurrences will be made using consistent parameters that will enable the development of a prioritized risk map. On the planning stage, management should agree on the most appropriate definitions and number of categories to be used when assessing both likelihood and impact. Impact. The assessment of the potential impact of a particular risk may be complicated by the fact that a range of possible outcomes may exist or that the risk may occur a number of times in a given period of time. Such complication should be anticipated and a consistent approach adopted, which, for example, may seek to estimate a worst case scenario over, say, a 12-month time period. The assessment of the impact of the risk on the organization should take into account the financial impact, the impact on the organization's viability and objectives, and the impact on political and community sensitivity. The analysis may be either qualitative or quantitative, but should be consistent to permit comparisons. For example, the qualitative approach is high, moderate, or low. The following scale is to be used as a guide only. Note that both the scale and definitions are the same for hazards and operations. For high level impact, financial impact on the organization is likely to exceed, say, dollar Z million, or significant impact on the organization's viability or its strategic operations objectives, or significant political and or community sensitivity. Moderate impact, financial impact on the organization is likely to be between $Y million and Z million, or moderate impact on the organization's viability or its strategic operational objective. Moderate political and or community sensitivity. Low impact, financial impact on the organization is likely to be between A million to $B million, or minimal impact on the organization's viability or its strategic operational objectives, or minimal political and community sensitivity. Likelihood of occurrences. The likelihood of a risk occurring may be assessed on a gross, a net, and a target basis. The gross basis assess the inherent likelihood of the event occurring in the absence of the process which the organization may have in place to reduce that likelihood. The net basis assess the likelihood taking into account current conditions and processes to mitigate the chance of the event occurring. The target likelihood is the risk occurring reflects the risk appetite of the organizations, where the net likelihood and the target likelihood for a particular risk differ. This would indicate the need to alter the risk profile accordingly. Risk treatment, response, risk avoidance, eliminating the risk reduction, minimizing impact or probability, risk transfer, shifting risk through insurance or hedging, risk acceptance, accepting risk with proper monitoring. How to risk response? Risk response or architecture ensures that resource allocation respond to the continuum of risk faced by the organizations. For its success, the response or architecture is reliant upon gaining commitment from executive management and the board of director, establishing the business process, including assigning responsibilities for change, resourcing, communications, training, and reinforcing a risk culture throughout the organization via human resource mechanism. Managing the different elements of business risk is a shared responsibility. Senior management faces several pressing needs. First, it must choose tools and techniques appropriate for particular risk elements. Second, the more challenging management must decide how integrated or dispersed its approach to risk should be. This involves designing and implementing organizational structure, system, and process to manage risk. Risk monitoring and review, continuous tracking of risk and control measures ensures effectiveness of risk responses. Adjustments are made as business conditions change. The final component of effective risk management is the reporting and monitoring structure to ensure that risk response gaps are filled and that the risk responses continues to operate effectively and remain appropriate in light of changing conditions. This should enable the risk management activities throughout the organization to be monitored, aggregated, and reported upward to the board of director. This responsibility is often given to either a dedicated risk manager or a subcommittee of senior manager and company directors. For example, internal reporting. Business risk management reporting outputs must be carefully turned to the needs of the various uses of business risk information. The information must be concise, unambiguous, standardized, and integrated with existing reporting processes. A preliminary assessment of user needs for business risk management information and suggested response to those needs is set out in the following table. Significantly tailoring to significant management needs may be necessary. Reporting on shareholder value at risk is becoming a central theme. User needs and suggested response. The board or directors and most senior management need to know about the most significant exposures for the organizations. Can confirm that the business risk management process is operating effectively. Gain an understanding of the shareholder value at risk, particularly within the control of management. See how these exposures are trending over time. Suggested response: top 10 or more risk reported for the organizations and the major business groups, including consolidated and summarized data, capacity to report emerging risk and other exceptional information, and balanced status reporting opportunities and hazards, impact measures in shareholders value terms with an indication of which risks are controllable through management actions, year on year comparisons. In this way you can monitor the risk also. Risk management framework. A risk management framework provide a structured and consistent approach to managing risk across the organizations. Key elements of a risk management framework: one, risk policy and objectives, organizational structure and roles, risk identification and assessment tools, risk control mechanisms, community communications and reporting, monitoring and continuous improvements. Popular frameworks: COSO Enterprise Risk Management Frameworks and ISO 31000 Risk Management Framework. Emerging best practice indicates the need for formal risk management framework in order to guide the integration of risk management into organizations' day-to-day operations. The elements could include risk management policy, which is as an organizational risk management policy statement defines its approach to risk management and its attitude to the appetite for risk. The policy also defines overall responsibilities for the policy, for risk review, as well as the reporting requirements. A sample policy set out low. First is resourcing risk management. The resourcing of risk management involves the identification of resources required to implement, monitor, and coordinate the risk management process, including the reporting of risk management. Second, implementation of risk management. The implementation of risk management involves the formalizations of the processes involved in the identification and definition of risk, the assessment of a risk in terms of likelihood and impact. Guidance on this was set out in the previous sections of this session, and the key aspects of the business processes to respond to risk management review and reporting. This formalizes the process of risk reviews and reporting, including both the form and regularity of reporting and the risk reporting structure. The risk policy should be adopted by management and endorsed by the board of directors. Scope of financial risk management. The scope includes mar- managing market credits, liquidity, and operational financial risk, use of financial instruments, such as derivatives, risk assessment in investments and financing decisions, capital structures, and asset liability management, global financial risks due to international operations. Means these are the areas where risk management is essential. Process of risk management, we already seen that risk identifications, risk measurement, measuring exposure using statistical and financial models, tools, value at risk, VR, sensitivity analysis, ratio analysis, risk evaluations, risk control, mitigations, risk monitoring and reporting. And conclusion, risk management and financial risk management are essential components of modern business strategy. A structured risk management process and framework enable organizations to minimize losses, enhance stability, and achieve long-term financial sustainability. Thank you. And this session is over.